Hi, I'm Joe Street, and welcome to the HackCess Show. Become a better version of yourself and work harder. People are at different stages in their life,
Mm.
and generally it means they're at different stages in their journey. And because of that, people by nature are nice.
Hi and welcome to the HackCess Show. It's the place where you can find life hacks on how to become the best version of yourself and achieve your goals. We show you how to walk the talk from successful people. And today we're joined by Joe Street. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. I am obviously loving life at the minute because we're all stuck in our own houses and there's not much we can do. But aside from that, it's good. It's good to be here. It's good to be alive. And yeah, I'm glad to be talking to you guys for
Yeah, thanks so
first
much. So can you give us a quick overview of what you do for the viewers?
So I am an actor and model based in London. I basically just work in film primarily. I don't do much theatre, but over the years, having worked in TV and film, I've developed more and more of an interest in it. And because of that, I started doing writing as well. And ultimately, I just love creating content. And I think that is probably the most important thing in the industry is, people in my line of work enjoy telling stories. And that's exactly what I'm here for.
Yeah, definitely. And is that like something you always wanted to do, or you're like, I like movies, maybe I should like become an actor or something like that?
Well, as a kid, I always used to quite enjoy doing bits of acting. I never had the confidence, funnily enough, when I was younger, to sort of to be on the stage. I had, our school had a theatre, which gave so many kids a massive, massive opportunity to perform and to learn the skills in that industry. And I think because I never had kind of stagey parents, I was always kind of thought, I like maybe I'm not starting off as a good enough actor, so what can I do? How can I compete with the people that have been doing it since they were like 2 or 3? And because of that, I think I kind of just sort of leaned away from it to start with. Like I kind of, when I was a kid, my biggest focus was always like football. I used to absolutely love football, and that kind of took priority. But I think it was only kind of later in life that I kind of thought, you know what, I wanted to do acting. What was standing in my way? Myself, really. The only thing that was standing in my way was my confidence and thinking, I'm not good enough to do it compared with these other people. But actually, you can do anything you set your mind to, really. And I think because of that, I kind of thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. And luckily, I've managed to kind of stay in it for as long as I have, because it's kind of it's been that sort of snowball effect. Like, when I started, I didn't have necessarily the skills set, to be doing anything of note. And then obviously, you kind of over time you just learn and you develop as a person, and in terms of kind of what you're capable of doing.
Mm.
And then, kind of the more you do, the more people kind of are attracted to you and decide, hang on, yeah, you'll be worth doing this for us, or whatever. And it's just kind of, it's nice to see that kind of when you put work in, you kind of do get stuff out of it, and you can transform yourself, I suppose, in a way from someone who is completely alien to a specific industry, even though it's an industry that they'd like to go into,
Mm.
and develop and end up being the person that you never thought you could be.
Yeah. I think acting is also like a super healthy way to live if you take it seriously, because you have to work on your confidence, you have to work on your looks, you have to work on your health, your mindset, all that. So it's pretty much like all in one, like the ultimate thing you can do.
I,
And
I,
so
I
how do you work on your confidence and all that?
well, I think asking someone how do they work on the confidence is quite a difficult one. It's quite a difficult one for me to say, because ultimately, like, if there was some sort of like drink that you could take to be more confident, then I think everyone would take it. And I suppose you could kind of say that about alcohol in a way, but that's not going to really help you day to day. And if it does, you should probably see someone.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, I think it's just kind of moving out of your comfort zone ever so slightly and trying to do things that you don't necessarily think you're capable of, but kind of bit by bit. Because if you take kind of small steps away from that sort of comfort zone, and actually you get positive feedback and kind of like good stuff happens, it encourages you to kind of step out. And I think obviously, like, in terms of this industry, you do have setbacks, and you do have things that don't necessarily go your way. But I think the kind of the best way to improve is to kind of say, you know what, I am I am me. I'm no one better than me, I'm no one worse than me, but ultimately, you know, someone is going to value me as what I am, and generally people value you based on your own value of yourself. I think actors in general, obviously, you know, like we are kind of scrutinized quite a lot, and because of that, you are encouraged to kind of be the best version of yourself. And I wouldn't actually necessarily say it's always healthy. I think, you know, because you're in an industry where, you know, people are always kind of constantly watching you, and yes you're wanting to be the best version of yourself, but a lot of the time that's because you're kind of fearful of not being that person, and you know, you're trying to create this perception of yourself to the outside world for you, you know, to look at you and kind of think, okay, yeah, that person is that type of person, when actually a lot of people kind of, particularly in the industry, are a bit sort of a bit more fearful, I guess, of the whole, you know, the whole world, and that whole, you know, being on stage or in front of people, you know, whether that's on screen or actually on physical theatre. And I think kind of, you know, the more people you get to know, and you know, the more people that you talk to within an industry, a lot of people that are kind of achieving really amazing things, some of, like, quite often it kind of stems from a place of fear, which is sort of, I find quite unusual, because obviously you kind of like, it's that whole idea of, you know, what is, you know, what spurs someone on. And I think a lot of the time, you know, if you don't have much of an incentive behind you, whatever that may be, you won't necessarily tend to go as far as the people that are sort of really trying to prove a point. And quite often that kind of trying to prove a point stems from, you know, a place where it's like, you know, maybe as a kid they weren't necessarily as confident, you know, kind of a similar sort of way that I talk about my own sort of childhood, or you know, or it's just kind of like, you know, just wanting to be more than you were in the past, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I think it's super, like, I don't know, I like what you said about fear and all that. And if you think about, like, everybody has a fear, so like, instead of feeling like you're judged and like somebody here is like coming to you and yelling at you, it's like everybody has a fear, so their expression, like, they're expressing their own fears. And but like, let's put that aside for a moment. Like, how do you deal with, you talked about confidence and all that, so how do you deal with rejection when you do like a lot of auditions and all that? You know, it's always, when you see like movies and you see like people going to auditions, it's very competitive and all that. But yeah, I was talking to Leo the other day, and it was like, no, it's just like, if you're made for the role, you're gonna be made for the role, so you're gonna have it. But if you're not, you know, it's just like moving on, and it's just like good criticism, you know.
Well, that's the thing. I think when I first started, I would go, you know, I would go to auditions and kind of think, oh, hang on, I've got an audition, you know, they want me, this is great. And then you would get a call from your agent basically saying, yeah, for whatever reason, they don't want you for the project. And it's kind of like, oh, like what's wrong with me? What have I done? You know, was my audition not good enough? You know, did I say something, you know, before the audition, when I was, you know, like all of these things that kind of run through your head, and you kind of think, you know, it's my fault. What have I done? What could I have done better? And the honest answer is, you know, 90% of the time it is nothing to do with what you could have done better. You know, there are so many reasons why a casting panel or producers or directors will pick a certain character, you know, or a certain actor for a role. And you know, like, all you have to kind of do is think about the other people that are in the room, that will have been at the room at some point. You know, if you're one of 100 people that's going for an audition across, you know, the globe in so many different countries or whatever, or, you know, if you're just one of 5 people in an audition in a local space, you never know what the people that you're up against, you never know what their audition is going to be like. You never know whether there is going to be something else that would encourage a casting team to want to cast someone. Generally, casting directors are kind of better for this because their entire job is based around performance, which, you know, is kind of what it should be. But I suppose, you know, people with a kind of more a producer's head on, you know, it might be the case that they'll prioritize people over, you know, their sort of social media following. You know, if they are a brand, this actor, and they are gonna, you know, if they cast them in their film, then it means that, you know, 100,000 extra people are going to watch watch this film that wouldn't do necessarily if if you cast the other guy. Then there's always things that kind of like are out of your control in a way. And I think the more you kind of the more I auditioned, the more I kind of went to castings and failed, kind of the more I kind of thought, what, actually you kind of start to think of these things, and you think it's not what you do, it is obviously you want to give your best performance, but once you've done that, all you can do is kind of knock it on the head and just think, what, like, I've done the audition, I've done my best. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And what I started to do generally is, once I go to an audition, as soon as I leave the room, I will try and book as many different things that I possibly can for the dates that the work is. So whether it's like a holiday, or whether it's another audition, or another like job or whatever, in my head I'll always kind of think, when I leave the room, I'll assume that I haven't got it until a point as they call me back. The issue that I have nowadays is when I get kind of second auditions and callbacks, I then kind of think to myself, oh man, that means they really did like me. And then obviously the whole thing happens again. But ultimately you kind of just got to ignore it and move on. And obviously, it's more than likely that casting team will want to see you again for other stuff. So even if you don't get that project, it's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. I think in terms of probabilities too, like there's a lot of people, like there's only one person for the role. So like, yeah, it's like if there's 100 person in the room, there's like 1% chance you get the role. So just like if you do like 100 auditions, you're gonna get one role at least.
Well, that's it. And I think I sort of going back to kind of my career path. I started out doing more modeling than I did anything else. And in the sort of the commercial modeling game, so much of it is about chance rather than anything else. It's less about performance, because in a commercial, you've got quite a smaller space. It's quite a shorter form thing, so you can kind of hide bad acting. And because of that, actually, it is just, they'll have an idea of what they want in terms of the type of person that they've kind of created in this concept for like a commercial. And if someone walks through the room and they're exactly that, then of course you're going to prioritize them. But it's a lottery, and it's kind of like, you still go to it because, like you said, every so often you do get your numbers picked, and it's great.
And so how do you deal with the fact that you have to like forge your own path and also like listen to criticism on the side? Isn't like hard to do?
Well, I think it's a balance. I think there are, like, I've met actors and directors that are so sort of kind of stuck in their own ways, and the idea that performance is subjective is, I completely understand. Like I'll always find myself watching movies or like Netflix, just kind of watching TV shows and thinking about performance and thinking, I wouldn't have done that if I were that actor, or I would have done this instead, and because it is kind of subjective, you can kind of argue both ways as to what's right. And because of that, you kind of sometimes you find people are kind of just become so immune to criticism that they actually don't take it on board. But then at the same time, if you listen to all criticism, sometimes it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily stem from the right place. And as is the case with a lot of kind of social media these days, and people's ability to kind of speak up and talk about your performance and whatever, sometimes if you were to only listen to kind of the bad things, it would really, really get you down. And again, same with anything. It's about finding that balance between what is helpful and what is not.
So do you try to like maybe set a vision for yourself of like how you want to become, and like if you have like any criticism that doesn't go like in this way, you don't listen to it, but if it goes like, I don't know, like let's say you want to be like in scenario A, and if somebody says like, all right, if you want to go to scenario A, you should be more like that, so you're going to listen to more like their feedback rather than if they say if you want to become scenario B, and you're like, no, I don't care about that, I want to be scenario A.
I think I think it's always important to never kind of lose track of scenario A, because
Yeah.
obviously that's what you that's what you want, that's what you're aspiring to do. And typically the type of people that will tell you how to get there are the type of people that have been through it themselves. They're the type of people that have done it themselves, whether they're directors that used to be actors, or whether they're directors that have sat in on these types of situations and said, what, your performance is great, but it lacks that something that it needs to, for you to get into that particular place. And I guess it's kind of just a case of trying to measure, how far you want to come away from yourself, because ultimately, actually, particularly with acting, the biggest thing in terms of any performance is you being honest. And I think at drama school you kind of like get taught to just be able to go to a completely neutral place, so that when you're in a when you're playing a role, you can just be that person and just live that person's life, and then actually there's no acting involved. You're just reacting to the scenes around you, and you're just being that person. But ultimately, I think you kind of, as an actor, you can sort of, there can be a tendency to kind of lean that way in terms of your own personality, because you're like, well, actually, hang on a minute, I went to that casting, and when I walked in the room, I was really, really confident because that particular character was confident, and I ended up getting that role. Well, maybe I should walk into every room confident, be that confident guy that I aspire to be, and then obviously when I do my performance, just do the performance. But ultimately, you kind of, that's not necessarily you. So it's kind of you don't want to, at no point do you ever want to be false.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, depending on your circumstances and what's happened to you in life and where you are at any given time, you will be a different person to someone who's experienced different things. But ultimately, I think it's important to kind of like stay true to yourself. And if you do sort of find techniques, or you find ways to kind of just be slightly different or give slightly more, or then obviously it's important to kind of to follow that. But at the same time, if you have tried to get to scenario A and you're like, hang on a minute, for me to do this whole kind of journey or arc to get round there is just so far away from me, then sometimes sometimes scenario B maybe where you should be going. And it depends entirely on you. Everyone's an individual, so yeah, I guess it depends.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it's super important what you said about acting and reacting, because like being true to yourself is always like better on camera. So like when you see like bad acting, it's usually like people like outside of the, like they're not doing what they're used to. So like even if it's not the exact role, but you're doing something that it's very like honest, and it's you're reacting, it's completely like genuine and natural reactions, it's always going to look better on camera for sure.
Absolutely. And I think like generally, when less like once you're in an audition situation, you're in an audition situation, and you can play and you can perform and you can explore things that you wouldn't necessarily. But I think before that, the reason that you'll get called into a room is because they see something in yourself that they want. They don't want someone different to play this part. They want an extension of you. Whether that's because they've seen you play something similar in a different movie, or they've seen you on stage, or they just know what you're like as a human being, and actually kind of maybe they've written the part for you, or whatever. It's kind of there's a tendency to kind of want, as a performer, you just want to explore, and you want to experiment and play basically with characters, and it is fun to get completely out of your head and into someone, like into the head of someone that's completely different and so far away from you. But generally, in terms of the whole the way it works, people do get typecast, because that they generally get kind of typecast around the types of people they are in real life, I suppose. And it's only kind of once you've been doing it for a few years that you kind of are able to kind of take on projects that allow you to experiment, and people trust you more as an actor, so they can say, actually, like someone like Tom Hardy, he's a typical kind of I don't want to say thuggish guy, but he, you know, a gritty actor that, you know, has a lot of kind of similar parts. But, you know, nowadays he can kind of, you know, people will cast him in all sorts of different stuff, and it's because, you know, it's because people have become, uh, you know, trusting of him, and they know what he'll give. So actually, you know, he can come further away from his true self because you know, people know he'll do it honestly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so how do you set your goals in terms of like everyday life? And is it like a number of auditions you want to go to, or is it like in terms of numbers, or just like having fun and just keeping on doing what you like, you know?
I think I don't ever set myself a goal for like for a number of auditions that I'm going to get, because I think there are so many external variables that kind of dictate that. You know, none more so than the fact that COVID has come along.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of it's always important to sort of try and have something in the back of your mind, you know, encouraging you to kind of to want more. I think it is kind of human nature to always want what you don't have, actually. So, you know, typically when I go through spells where I'm not auditioning much, you know, it'll kind of give me a kick up the backside and say, you know what, hang on a minute, I need to be doing something more, because for whatever reason this has stopped, and whether it's a reason that's out of my control or not, you know, the more you do, the more proactive you are as an individual, whether, you know, whether it's in acting or whether it's in anything else, the more proactive and the more productive you try to be in any time that you have, the more is going to come back at you. It's that whole kind of idea that obviously the more you put out into the universe, the more comes back at you, and it's true, because, you know, like going back to the situation of auditions, when you leave the room and you write off the fact that you're going to get something, if you do spend time to say, well, you know what, I'm going to try and message this director because I know they've got a project coming up, or message this one, or like I'm going to try and record some, you know, a little monologue to send to casting directors or whatever, all of these kind of things, although, you know, when you send them you may well not get responses, or, you know, you may not well hear back straight away, you know, it will mean that ultimately, kind of, as you know, later down the line, when people have something that's suitable, they'll be like, actually, you know what, that's he would be good for that. And I think there's a tendency to sort of want to, I think because anyone in the creative industries, I think because you're not in a 9 to 5, you don't, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily wake up at 9, work to 5 o'clock, and then kind of clock off, because, you know, any number of reasons, like, you know, a lot of people that do lots of writing, you know, you tend to be more creative and imaginative, and writing tends to be easier late at night, or at least I find. But then actually there's no reason that you shouldn't be getting up at 9 o'clock to, you know, be learning monologues, or, you know, or doing bits of writing, or sending emails, or, like, you know, just trying to create that next opportunity for yourself, because obviously, you know, the opportunity is going to come from, you know, somewhere, or might come from somewhere else, but if it doesn't, you know, there's ways that you can perpetuate that yourself, and whether that's trying to write or produce your own stuff, whether it's, you know, just trying to just become a better version of yourself, and work harder, you know, it's all important, because you kind of, you know, if you don't do that, then you'll end up in the kind of same place, and you'll be that person who's kind of just sitting by their phone waiting for their agent to ring, and quite, you know, depending on your agent, sometimes that you know, sometimes it's a while between those phone calls.
Yeah, I think it's like a long-term investment. You just got to do like a lot of stuff and be productive, and yeah, you have to, like, results are going to come in the future. And are there like stuff you do like on a daily basis that you feel are really helpful to your personal development?
I think writing is the biggest one. I think the kind of one of the reasons I got into acting was because I like telling stories, and I like telling other people's stories, and living through characters. But I think, you know, one of the things that's always, I think maybe just because I've had quite I feel like I've had quite an interesting life, and I don't want to say I'm a bit of a liability, but I think growing up I've always kind of like, I'm a bit of a yes man, and because of that I've ended up in some situations that are quite funny, and I have quite a few kind of funny stories and interesting stories that not necessarily most people have. And because of that, I've always kind of thought I want to. I obviously I retell these stories to my friends, to people that I meet, but then I'm like, in my head, I'm like, these things that have happened to me are too good not to be told, like shared with the world. So I think because of that, obviously I've done sort of writing recreationally, but I think the more you kind of having done that for like a few, like probably years and years, and then kind of just thought, it's there as a, as just a creative outlet for, the instances when I'm not necessarily acting, if I'm doing other jobs or whatever. But obviously once it's there, it's like, well, actually it seems a waste not to try and kind of get it produced, really. And I think at the moment I'm kind of working on a few different bits and pieces with a friend that we're looking to produce ourselves. And it's just, that's it. I don't necessarily need to be reliant on someone else making the type of things that I want to be in, because actually I could quite easily make them myself. And obviously, yeah, I say quite easily, it becomes a little bit more difficult because I'm not a massive production house that's that's got hundreds of millions of pounds to spare to draw the right cast and directors and everything to the stuff that I want to be making. But actually, ultimately, bearing in mind everyone in the industry are all storytellers. If you have the right project and you have something that is interesting, then people will want to jump on board, even if you don't have millions and millions of pounds to throw at them.
Yeah, it's just about like finding the right people to like put around the crew and like tell a story together. Yeah. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, in terms of the question that you asked, which was creating my own opportunities or things that I do. I think just writing. There's not a specific list of rules that I say I haven't done that today, I need to do that, or but generally I'll kind of I will spend time on casting websites trying to source my own stuff. I will every now and then I will kind of message my agent and say, how are things going? Has anything come along? And yeah, ultimately kind of like I'll try and sort of have fairly regular meetings with the guy that I'm planning to produce stuff with. Ultimately, yeah, just because we kind of want to, you can have as many ideas as you need, and you can do as much as you want. But if you don't necessarily have that time scale, then actually sometimes you can kind of forget about stuff. And this kind of stems back to what I was saying before in terms of the writing that I was doing. I kind of, because it was always just a recreational project, when I got busier, I kind of put it to the side. And then I reread like a few of my kind of older scripts recently, and I was like, first of all, I was like, great, this is funny. Like some of this is actually funny, because you kind of, whenever you write it, you never kind of think, you always think, I wonder, will people find this funny? But if you've forgotten what you've written, then actually you're reading it for the first time, and you're like, oh, you can give a better response. But obviously a lot of it is dated, so a lot of the references and stuff are, I would have to be changed. And I'm like, well, actually, if I were to just leave that for another 5 years, then it will be even more dated. And it's kind of there comes a point where you have to start putting a timeline on stuff.
Yeah. So do you set deadlines for yourself? Like, is it like if like expiration dates and stuff you do, like writing and like personal?
It's a bit more difficult with writing, because obviously, like, pretty much as soon, like, anytime I set myself a deadline for writing, I will then automatically just get like writer's block and be like, that I can't finish this. I don't know what to do. Why has this happened all of a sudden? I think, like I said, I kind of I find it easier to kind of write late at night, and actually sometimes when you kind of do get those projects that you're kind of working on for quite a long time, and you start setting deadlines, sometimes at that point, because you start to struggle, actually it's sometimes better to kind of take a step away from one particular project, just to look at another one, because then you start thinking of different things. And actually, sometimes you'll be looking at a different script and you'll be working your way with the characters, and all of a sudden you'll be like, hang on a minute, and then you'll kind of like apply something that's just come to your head here to whatever it is you were trying to complete, and actually it kind of makes sense of the story, or it helps you progress. But I think in terms of sort of the deadline setting, I'll generally I'll kind of, between me and my friend Tobias, we kind of, whenever I have something that I say I do want to complete a script by a certain date, I will get to that date, and however I've got on, I'll be like, right, at that point, I'm going to give it up to him to read through it, because it, again, looking through from a different perspective, even though it's, it's not your own, people, he will be able to tell me certain things that I wouldn't have thought of, or notice things and add value to it. And even though it's not necessarily a finished script, by having that deadline, that is a point at which you get something different. And then once that's thrown back at you, you can then set yourself another deadline, whether that's another 2-3 weeks time, or a month, 2 months, however long it is. You can then at that point kind of say, oh, that's a point. This is all the feedback that I've got from this. I want to take the majority of this on board. I'm not going to take this on board because this specific thing, because of this reason, or this reason. And then actually, you can kind of make progress, rather than, as I said, sort of kind of just sort of forgetting about projects, which is a tendency that it's something that I used to do quite a lot. I kind of, like I said, would kind of just write because stuff interesting would happen, and then I can kind of be like, okay, great, I'm busy now, and completely forget about it. And it's actually the point of this writing is to tell stories. And if the only person you're telling it to is your laptop and your printer, then it doesn't quite do exactly what you want it to do.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to make it more productive. Also, like if it goes back and forth with somebody, gives you like feedback, and then you can improve on it, rather than if you just say like, all right, I'm gonna write, and you just write like maybe half an hour every month, and it just doesn't go where you want it to go. It's good to find this balance, like to be able to actually make the story grow without actually forgetting about it. Yeah.
Well, that's it. And I think as well, like it makes it more real. The more people you share your writing with, the more real it becomes. And it's like, it's not just your thoughts that are now on paper. It's actually a project that both you and someone else, or would like to get off the ground, whether that's someone that you're producing it with, or whether it's someone, one of your friends that's read it, that's like, oh yeah, no, I'd like to see that. And yeah, I kind of like, I'm speaking from the point of view of having not really made anything of my own. So actually, kind of like, I'm sort of suggesting that these are the right things to do, and this is the way that I've gone about it, and I'm making progress. But until I can actually like show people stuff, then obviously I'm not going to be quite content. And perhaps there are ways in which I could have done it quicker. There's one particular project that I started writing 2 years ago, and we've been having like meetings about it for like literally probably about a year and a bit, which is a long time for what it is. And yeah, it kind of just got to it, and I was like, we need to step away from this, because this is just completely bogging us down, and it's preventing us from doing other stuff. And also, in that time frame, we could have written, produced, edited, and distributed like something, and we haven't. So it's kind of, yeah, I guess it's kind of, you take everything as an individual, but it kind of depends where where you are with it as to how successful you value what you're doing.
Yeah, and like as you said, like it's always, you can always look back and be like, all right, like I started doing this way, like from now on, and then you look back and you're like, oh man, I've been wasting so much time like in the past. And then you think like the way you do things right now is the best, and then in 6 months you're gonna realize like, oh man, like what I'm doing right now is just like a waste of time, and I could have been in way better. So I think you're always gonna be improving. And but I think it's good that you stay productive, and that that it's not gonna be perfect all the time.
And in terms of that sort of knowing that in 6 months you're going to be in a different space to you are now. So actually what you're doing now is not necessarily the right way.
Yeah.
You can, like, one reason I look at that sort of thing, going back to what you said a little bit earlier, is in terms of confidence. Now, as someone who is just starting out, you aren't necessarily going to have the confidence to speak to Steven Spielberg, for example, but actually there's no difference between Steven Spielberg and the guy that's making the first student film that you ever do when you're studying. Obviously the caliber of what they're making is going to be slightly different, but ultimately they're just a human being, and it's all they are is just someone that's all the difference is they are on different points in their journey. because he like Steven Spielberg will have been one of those, will have been that guy at some point. So actually, to create this sort of hierarchy system of, hang on a minute, I can't approach this person or this agency or this production company or this casting director because I'm not there yet. The way you get there is by doing that and being prepared to have people tell you, actually, no, you're not there yet, but that's because of this reason and this reason and this reason. At which point you can then say, hang on a minute, yeah, you're right. And then similarly, the more, in terms of kind of getting projects off the ground, kind of the more people you speak to that have had life experience, that have been through exactly what it is that you're trying to go through, like, to have their hindsight as your foresight is gonna put you in a good place, because it means you won't be wasting all the same time they wasted by doing all everything else, and trying to find your own way. Because actually, yes, while it's while you will learn stuff by doing, if you actually sit down and listen to people and listen to them talk about their own experiences, that people tend to be very, very helpful. And all people do, that are in a sort of advisory situation, or that do have that sort of like mentorship because they're at that age of that experience, all they want to do is help you, because actually they will see bits of themselves in you, and it's kind of, it's nice for them to see you improve, and it would be, I suppose, ignorant in a way, but also it would be dismissive of you not to kind of take on board what they say.
Yeah. All right. I think I want to ask you another question before we wrap it up. Like, I feel like I could be like asking you questions for like 3 hours, but I don't want to like take your entire day. But how about like networking? Like, how big is networking in your life, and like how important do you think it is to just reach out to new people, like show them what you're doing, just like saying hi, like, I don't know, getting advice, all this kind of stuff?
Now, like, for me, I think networking is huge. I've come into the industry as a non-actor, basically. So when I first started like 8-9 years ago, I hadn't been to drama school, and therefore I didn't necessarily know the right people, or I didn't really know anything too much. It was the only thing that I would learn was from other people, and kind of going into that sort of networking situations, not only do you meet people that are, the type of people that may well be casting you and stuff, the type of people that may well be kind of, producing stuff that you're going to be in, or other actors that are in a similar position to you that may well be producing stuff of their own later down the line. But you will also find, again, you'll find these figures that are going to be the type of people that are able to give you advice because they are further along their journey. But I think networking is absolutely hugely important, because even just by sparking up a conversation on social media with someone who's in the game, or in the industry, little conversations, just replying to people's stories. I know, obviously, it's you don't want to be the type of person that just hounds someone, because obviously, in any sort of human relationship, it's annoying. But ultimately, just staying in touch with people that you have worked with in the past, and meeting, staying in touch with people that you've met through networking. Ultimately, you are in the same position as them. We are all storytellers. We all want to be part of creating this story. So actually, when you go to a networking event, or whether whether you meet people at a film premiere or whatever, or whether you just start chatting to people online, you become aware of more and more projects. And actually, from when you kind of transform your outlook from an actor's outlook, where you kind of are sucking at the teat, for want of a better phrase, you're like, give me a role, I need a role in this, I need to be cast in this because this is what I want to do. When you change your outlook from that of that person to the kind of producer's head, and think, actually, what do I want? I want an actor to be part of it. I just want a good actor that knows what they're doing, or that looks a certain way, or whatever. Once you are at that level, and you know what what performance you're capable of, and that you are going to be decent enough on set when you turn up. It is all about networking and about making those connections that are going to be the ones that ultimately are producing stuff and get you in a place, and are go through their journey with you, and ultimately 30 years time, 40 years time are going to be sitting through interviews with you, talking about films that they made 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And and a lot of the time people enjoy working with the same people. You see it in Hollywood quite a lot. A lot of the directors work with the same cast, same crew, and production houses, and because of that, you can tell those relationships will have stemmed from somewhere, but it's not necessarily always a call from an agent that gets you in the room, that introduces those two people. Sometimes it is, oh yeah, no, we met while we were both in the pub, or we met at a theatre, or we met at a networking event, and those are crucial, I think, for actors and anyone in the industry. And also, one thing I will say as well is, a lot of the time with a lot of the networking events that I go to, a lot of them are preceded by talks and panel discussions, which are all very relevant in terms of like helping you understand how the industry works and all that side of things as well. And because of that, it's I'll try and go to as many as I possibly can, because I think it's important.
Yeah, I think, like, even if you're not an actor or in the industry, I think it's important to just like reach out to people. And like nowadays, I didn't used to do that, but like when I see something on social media, I'm like, that's actually helpful. I would actually scroll to something else, and now I'm like, that's actually helpful. So I'm just gonna message this person and be like, that was actually helpful. So it's you start a conversation, and sometimes they're like, all right, everything you do is super nice. Like, come and talk to us like on the show. And it's it's how you start things, and you start like conversation, relationships, all that. Yeah,
exactly. And like I said, like again, when it doesn't involve acting, when it does, it's all the same thing. People are at different stages in their life, and generally it means they're at different stages in their journey, and because of that, people by nature are nice, and it's kind of, humanity is so fascinating in a way, because there are instances where you kind of feel, I'm competing with someone, or there's this kind of competitive element in a way that kind of thinks, hang on a minute, it's an us, or it's a me v them situation. But it's really not. It's it's like, we are all a collective, we are all part of the same species. We have all kind of just landed on this earth, and have been thrust into the situations that we're in. And because of that, if you think about how you're likely to be in 20 years time, 30 years time, once you've achieved slightly more, of course you're going to want to help someone else, because you see yourself in them, because we are all kind of one and the same, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. Well, Joe, thanks so much. Like, all your answers were like, that was amazing. So now it's promo time for you. So whatever you got going on, you can like promote everything you want, social media, tell people like where to follow you and all that.
Cool. So I mean, my personal social medias, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, they're all Joe Street 18. But my production company that I've just started up with a friend is Film Bedouer. So that's FILM BEDUER. Now it's an E acute because it's based on a town in France, sort of in the Dordogne-ish, Selly Valley, if you know.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, so Film Bedouer at Twitter. And then in terms of stuff that's coming out, I shot a movie called Bram Stoker's Van Helsing, either side of lockdown. So we started March time, got stopped, and had to pick up in September after the first English lockdown finished. But that will be due out on the 29th of March on Amazon Prime in the UK. So I'm assuming it will follow suit, pretty much close after around the world. Otherwise, it should be on DVD. It won't get a cinema release, but you know what? Who cares?